is the France 24 debate. We're waiting for Egypt's President Mohamed Morsi to address the nation. We're wondering, will he bend in his standoff over the broad judicial powers that he's decreed for himself and over that constitutional referendum that's been rushed through the Constituent Assembly and will be put to Egyptian voters on December 15th. As it stands now, with us to talk about it from his home constituency of Luxor, Abdul Mawgood Dardari, Member of Parliament from the Muslim Brotherhood's Freedom and Justice Party. Joining us here in Paris, Hana Youssef, an Egypt activist, and also with us, Alexandria-born activist Shahinaz Abdel Salam. Mohammed Salem, France 24 producer on our Arabic language channel, is with us, and Robert Springborg, who teaches at the Naval Postgraduate School in California. Just to give you a sense here, there was, before the army cleared the area around the presidential palace, pro-Morsi supporters chanted their support for the army, for the men in uniform, with cries of "the people, the military, and the police are one hand," saying one slogan, and a banner that read, "The best thing about the president's decisions is they cannot be challenged," but they are being challenged, and not just from the secular opposition. The scholars at Egypt's top Islamic body, Al-Azhar University, putting out a statement calling on Morsi to, quote, "suspend the latest decree and stop using it." Al-Azhar calling for unconditional dialogue between the president and his opponents. And I guess that brings us back to the question we put at the top, Abdul Mawgood Dardari. What can President Morsi say that will calm the situation?
I expect him to emphasize the importance of dialogue, and the opposition has to listen to the voice of dialogue. They have to welcome what the president of all Egyptians is going to say, because in a democracy, there is no violence. In a democracy, you do not go and burn offices of a political party.
But will he follow the words of the Al-Azhar scholars and suspend that decree?
Al-Azhar scholars have the right to say whatever they want to say. But remember, we are in a democracy. We are not in a theocracy. There is a big difference between the two. In democracy, people voices their concerns. But at the end of the day, the president of Egypt, the civilian elected president of Egypt, is the one who's going to make the decision. And that is very important for both the government as well as the opposition. The opposition really needs to understand the importance of democracy, that violence is not going to solve the problem. Violence will never serve their own interest. Violence leads to more violence. We lose more young Egyptians. Does not really matter whether 6 out of those, the 7 who are killed, 6 of them are the Freedom of Justice Party, but they're all Egyptians. And we need no more killings of any Egyptian. The fingertail of any Egyptian is as important as anything else. So what we need to do now is to welcome dialogue, either opposition or from the government, and we have to talk with one another. When we fail to reach an agreement, when we discuss things politically, we have to go back to the main authority, which is the people. The people is what we need to listen to, and it is just a few more days, and we will listen to the Egyptian. December 15th is an important day in the history of Egypt, where Egyptians will say yes to the new constitution or no.
All right. So for you, it's straight at
yes.
For you, it's
everyone has to listen.
So
if
for you,
they
it's
say no, then that's a different story. They have to work on the constitution again. And I expect Egyptians in large numbers, no less than 70%, are going to say no, because Egyptians need stability. Egyptian needs the objectives of the revolution to be protected. And this is the best way to shorten the transitional period so that we have newly elected bodies. I need to go back to the parliament. I was elected by the people of Luxor. I am forbidden from doing my job now.
All right. So let me just bring in at this point Robert Springborg on this and ask him what is your prediction as to what Mohamed Morsi will say?
Well, I don't think he's going to offer any concessions because had he been inclined to do so, I think he would have done so up to this point. And by that, I mean the concession that is required for the negotiation that the member of parliament from Luxor is describing is that the decree of the 22nd of November would be rescinded. That has been the benchmark put down by the coalition formed by the, the secular opposition. So he's highly unlikely to do that. And I find it a little bit rich that the member from Luxor should be lecturing Egyptians on democracy and talking about a constitution, when in fact this constitution was formed in a highly undemocratic way, as indeed was the 1971 constitution, which is the model for it, as indeed was the 1964 constitution. And it's not until 1923, the original constitution of Egypt, that you had something resembling a democratic constitution. So we have a long string of constitutions having been written not in a participatory way, but literally in the office of the president, in the case of one under Nasser and one under Sadat, and now what is essentially the office of the Muslim Brotherhood in the case of this constitution. And so and all of these constitutions were approved in referendum, I might add. So it's not the process by which the voters are given a yes or no vote, it's the process by which this constitution is drafted and the full participation by all elements of society in it, in that drafting, and that has not occurred in this case. So this constitution is fundamentally anti-democratic, and it doesn't matter whether it's supported or not by the voters. It is anti-democratic, both in the way in which it was originally drawn up and in its content.
All right. The issue of sitting down to talk also comes up now. The question is, who do you talk with? Outspoken throughout the demonstrations, the ones we've seen here in the West, the former UN nuclear watchdog chief Mohammed el-Baradei and the former Arab League boss Amr Moussa.
We are prepared for dialogue if the constitutional decree, which contradicts all legal principles, is cancelled, and if the referendum on this constitution is postponed.
Mohammed Salem, if you do sit down, Mohamed Morsi and the opposition, are these the guys he sits down with? Who does he sit down with?
Well, he could sit with these guys, but I think he doesn't really want to, because
Are they representative of the opposition?
I mean, like, the revolutionaries would say no, because they are quite disappointed from this elite that they feel is a bit far from them. For example, Baradei, Sabahi and Amr Moussa have declared lately that they would join the sit-in in Tahrir, but they did not. I mean, some say that Amr Moussa was staying in a hotel room not far from there. So I think the young Egyptian revolutionaries really think that these people do not really represent them. A lot of them are disappointed by these people, but some would accept that they represent them. And
who would be the most able person to represent you in talks with President Morsi? Who would you like to see?
Yeah, a big number from what the activists I know and people I know, they are with Baradei, and then we have also Hamdan Sabahi and Abu Futuh, which is ex-Muslim Brotherhood also. He was also a candidate for the presidential. I think these three people could be in negotiation with Morsi, but of course after when he take back the decree and also freeze the referendum date, because
so no talks before that's done.
Of course, because he's like reproducing a dictatorship.
Hannah Youssef, who do you think best represents the opposition right now at this moment?
I think that there have been seven points in time, the past nearly 2 years, there have been several suggestions for presidential councils with many names that do represent, that were chosen even from people in Tahrir. So I would say a combination of what Shahinez said, but I would also include the young. We have many new parties, we have many activists that we know who are, that could be part of it. And I just want to say one thing. In all the discussion, we're talking about the secular opposition and Morsi, but it's not a question of secular and Islamist. In the revolutionary ranks, there are Islamists as well, like the current party, Egyptian current party.
Yeah.
So it's not a question of secular and Islamist, it's a question of the demands of the revolution and working against the revolution.
And this is what makes the polarization, because they are like the Muslims and not non-Muslim.
Yeah.
We are considered as non-Muslims. Yeah.
Abdul Magad Dardari was witness when we had a debate earlier this week, Mohammed Salem, in which our reporter Matthew Maban, just back from Cairo, told us that it was a very contrasted picture between those who support the protesters and those who support the president. And it's a bit everyone speaking to their own chapel at this point. Is there any way to really gauge which way Egyptian public opinion is going?
I think the country is really divided and really polarized these days, and I think it's going to take some time to really reach a dialogue. And what's happening on the level of politicians is also happening at the level of normal people. I know Egyptian friends who fight with each others because they have different ideas. And I think in all this, the Egyptians are learning democracy, and maybe learning it in a pretty harsh way, because it leads us to violence, unfortunately. And violence comes from both sides, as you said, but sometimes it's from one side as a reaction from the other one. For example, I myself find it a bit weird that the Muslim Brotherhood supporters went yesterday and broke the sit-in, which was peaceful, because the day before we had a huge protest near the presidential palace, and the security forces retreated, and the demonstrators could invade the palace even, and Mohammed Morsi escaped himself in a convoy of 18 cars, and nothing happened. So why did this happen? Why did one part start being violent? And I know that the Muslim Brotherhood say that they were faced with violence when they went to the sit-in next to the presidential palace, but I think they couldn't bear the idea that the revolutionaries are sitting and organizing a sit-in next to the palace, and it's unacceptable for them. You cannot let them have tahrir and have the presidential palace. So that's why they went, I think. And unfortunately, what happened.
I'm listening to all of you speak, and I'm just thinking back 2 weeks ago. Morsi announced his decree on November the 22nd, just as he'd wrapped up a successful brokering of a truce for Gaza and securing a $4.8 billion tentative loan from the IMF. Now, after heaping praise on Morsi, this week the United States cautiously critical.
Almost 2 years ago, the Egyptian people took to the streets because they wanted real democratic change. And they, therefore, not the Americans, not anyone else, but the Egyptian people deserve a constitution that protects the rights of all Egyptians, men and women, Muslim and Christian, and ensures that Egypt will uphold all of its international obligations.
Robert Springborg, on Tuesday, the Obama administration put out a statement calling on the opposition to demonstrate peacefully, and that sort of raised eyebrows a bit. Where does the Obama administration stand?
Well, it stands in a very nervous place. On the one hand, it was very pleased with President Morsi's handling of the Israeli attack in Gaza and the diplomatic backwash from that. And so it thought it had a good working relationship established with him, and then suddenly he takes steps that make it very awkward for the Obama administration, which has been criticized in the past for being too close to Islamists. So they're trying to finesse this issue and at the same time retain as much as they can of the security relationship they have, most importantly with the military, but secondarily with the Ministry of Interior. And so these are very difficult things for the Obama administration to juggle. So their wording is being chosen carefully. The statement that you just made reference to was to try to avert violence, which they see as a fundamental threat to the precarious situation there. But they, in fact, have very little control over things. And so they are just trying to avoid misstating things, provoking parties, and causing problems for themselves here in the United States.
And as you just said, Robert Springborg, a lot of the people in the Egyptian military have had working relationships with their counterparts at the Pentagon for decades. And what's the sense in how has Mohammed Morsi shed himself from the shadow of the military? Is he been able, when he cleaned house at the top, was he able to take control?
No, he was not able to take control of the military, and he reached an agreement whereby civilian authority would not be asserted over the military. And that was the bottom line for the high command that's now in place. They could not deliver up the military to President Sisi and the Brotherhood. They had to look after its institutional interests. President Morsi agreed to that. So essentially, the Brotherhood and the military have now partitioned the state between them, with the military getting, in a sense, the lion's share of it. And so that has now been very much institutionalized within the draft constitution. And so is yet another reason why the acceptance of that constitution would be a fundamental setback to democracy in Egypt. You cannot have a democracy in which the military has the powers as is enshrined in this draft document.
Abdul Malgood Dardari, would you be happier with a constitution where Morsi was able to had a free reign in naming the defense minister?
That is not the only issue of the constitution. There are other many issues. But let me just make a general comment on calling what is happening now as a debate. I feel I am just one person against two or three. Maybe in later programs, we really need to make it a real debate, 1 versus 1 or 2 versus 2. Let me agree with your respected guests on the following. Number one, the Egyptian revolution belongs to all Egyptians, Muslims, Christians, men, women, young and old. That's a fact. The Egyptians have decided together to go the democratic way, not the revolutionary way. We had an election. The People's Assembly elected a constituent assembly. First, you cannot compare the constituent assembly.
It's what's happened since that we're talking about.
Let me just finish the idea. You cannot really compare the constituent assembly that we elected as the People's Assembly with Mubarak's years or Sadat's or even Nasser's or even during the colonial era. There is a big difference. Those people are elected by the elected body of the Egyptian people. Now, where to go from here? I believe in dialogue. Violence will never solve the problem. I believe in dialogue that respects democracy. Democracy means the rule of the people, by the people, for the people. So we have to respect the will of the Egyptian people. And I repeat again, it's only 10 days from today, and the Egyptians, all Egyptians have the right to go to the polling, and they will decide what is good for them, whether this
they'll decide for themselves.
As a package.
Abdul Malgood Dardari, unfortunately, it is the clock that is curtailing this debate. Unfortunately, I wish we could go on for longer. Thank you for joining us from Luxor. I want to thank Hannah Youssef and Shahinaz Abdel Salam for being with us, as well as Mohamed Salem and Robert Springborg in Monterey, California. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.